I love you, and a cop, dush, bang, throw her away. Sometimes they overreact.
For years, people painted Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison as the wild twins of the 60s, two firecrackers everyone swore were destined to explode together. Fans dreamed of one massive collaboration that could have blown the whole music world wide open. But the truth was nothing like the fantasy. Janis couldn't stand him, and her friends knew better than to even whisper his name around her. And it all came from one messed up night. One accidental moment where fate sat them next to each other. And please hit the subscribe button. It costs you nothing, but it means a lot to me. And everything went sideways fast. From that point on, these two icons weren't rivals. They were straight-up enemies. No apology came from anyone, and forgiveness never even stepped into the room. When the whole world thought they were soul-matched creative rebels in early 1968, Janis actually didn't hate Jim yet. Long before all the drama, before their names got twisted into wild stories, she respected him. Back then, she was still rocking stages with Big Brother and the holding company, bouncing between San Francisco and Los Angeles like a storm. At the KFRC Fantasy Fair that summer, she watched Morrison take over a crowd with this strange, chaotic energy that didn't look like anything she'd seen before. She leaned over to a musician next to her and muttered, "He's out of his mind, but he's good." That tiny comment was the first spark of curiosity. Just a spark, nothing more. A few weeks later, that spark turned into their first real interaction at a private Laurel Canyon hangout, packed with musicians, smoke, and late-night chatter. This was the first time Janis and Morrison actually spoke face-to-face. The conversation started soft and simple. Blues roots, exhaustion from performing non-stop, and how the industry pushed them into roles they never asked for. Janis didn't expect Jim Morrison to be soft-spoken when he wasn't drinking, but that night, he surprised her. He listened without cutting her off, nodding like her stories actually meant something. Later, she joked to a friend, half shocked and half entertained, "I didn't expect him to be polite." For Janis, that was basically a compliment. Nothing in those early moments hinted that she would one day feel real anger toward him. Back then, everything felt easy. When Morrison praised her Monterey Pop Festival performance from earlier that year, she even blushed a little before cracking a joke about stealing his audience if he didn't step up. He laughed and told her nobody could out-scream her, and for a second, they seemed perfectly aligned. Producer Paul Rothchild, who worked with both Janis and The Doors, noticed that spark right away. He became convinced the two could create something powerful together. So in late August 1968, he pulled Janis aside and said he wanted to introduce them properly, someplace quiet, a spot where musicians didn't have to yell over amps just to talk. Janis didn't overthink it for a second. She agreed on the spot, not realizing that tiny decision would flip everything upside down. She walked into that plan with curiosity, even a flicker of respect. She saw Morrison as unpredictable but brilliant, wild but interesting. Somebody she could debate, joke with, maybe even create music with one day. She had no clue that their next meeting would shatter all of that. She didn't know admiration would twist into shock, and that shock would morph into a grudge so deep she never shook it off. Everything blew apart on the very next encounter, the one Rothschild arranged. That meeting unfolded on the evening of September 13th, 1968, inside a tucked-away Hills house musicians used when they needed to vanish from Hollywood noise. The sun hadn't even fully set when the tension started building. When Janis pulled up that night, she expected a chill hangout, some real conversation, maybe a couple songs, nothing wild enough to make her regret showing her face. Inside, everything seemed calm. Jim Morrison was leaning on a post near the back door, holding a glass of wine that didn't look touched at all. Janis clocked it instantly and teased him about behaving himself, hoping he'd keep it that way. Morrison smirked, lifted the glass, and promised he was saving the wild part for later, and she laughed it off, thinking it was harmless. For the first hour, there was no hint of trouble. They sat at opposite ends of a long table, diving into the kind of artistic talk Rothschild always dreamed of capturing on tape. They traded ideas about blues phrasing, why Janis adored Bessie Smith, and why Morrison felt trapped inside the Lizard King image fans stuck on him. For a minute, it felt real, two humans, not two myths. But then the mood flipped. The room got louder, the music got heavier, and Morrison switched from wine to bourbon like someone flipping a switch. His whole vibe changed fast. He slid his chair closer to Janis, his voice thickening, his thoughts spilling out in messy, bold comments that made her skin tighten. The sensitive side he showed earlier was gone in seconds. Janis tried to lighten it with humor, the same trick she used whenever someone pushed too hard. She joked about needing air and stood up to head toward the sliding door. Morrison followed immediately, his shadow stretching behind her across the floor like a warning. He cornered her near the back porch, blocking the exit and leaning in way too close, while insisting she match his intensity like it was some kind of challenge. Janis didn't respond. She slipped sideways, grabbed the door, and excused herself with a calm voice, hiding a storm of discomfort. Outside, she inhaled hard, steadying herself, and walked straight for her station wagon parked under a sycamore tree like it was the only safe place in sight. She opened the driver's door, ready to leave before the night turned into something she couldn't control. But Morrison came stumbling after her, cutting across the dirt driveway and calling her name with a mix of charm and entitlement that made her grip the steering wheel tighter. She climbed in, hoping that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Then came the moment that changed everything forever, the moment that broke any respect she had left. Morrison reached through the open window and grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her so hard her whole body twisted sideways. The sound that came out of her wasn't fear, it was pure shock that anyone, especially someone she had admired a few hours earlier, would dare put hands on her like that. Her reaction snapped out instantly. Janis's hand shot toward the bottle sitting on the passenger seat. She swung without thinking, instinct taking over, and the bottle shattered against Morrison's temple with a crack that froze the night. He dropped to the dirt, stunned, eyes half open, barely processing what just hit him. Blood slid down his eyebrow, mixing with spilled liquor and dust, turning the driveway into a surreal scene no one there ever forgot. Janis didn't wait for a single word. She kicked her door shut, turned the key, and tore out of that driveway so fast the gravel spit into the air behind her like sparks. When the dust settled, the witnesses stood in stunned silence. Not because Janis defended herself, but because Morrison's behavior had exposed a side of him people never talked about. That night didn't just spark a feud, it planted a hate in Janis so deep she carried it for the rest of her life. Janis thought the nightmare was finished the second she tore out of that Hidden Hills driveway, but the real shock hit her the very next morning. While she spent the day shaken, furious, and trying to make sense of Morrison's sudden shift into aggression, he walked straight into the Doors rehearsal studio on Santa Monica Boulevard like nothing happened. He touched the bruise on his temple, let out a laugh in front of his band, and dropped a line that later hit Janis like a punch. "She's wild. I think she likes me." That sentence cut deeper than the hair-pulling ever did. It showed her something colder than anger. It showed her how far he could twist reality. Morrison didn't just break boundaries. He rewrote whole events in his head until he was the victim, the hero, or the one being chased. Janis knew men like that back home. Men who could flip a woman's fear into their own fantasy, men who believed resistance made the story more exciting. That's exactly where her hatred took root. Over the next week, the lies started spreading like spilled paint. At a recording studio on La Cienega, someone casually mentioned Morrison claiming Janis lost control from excitement. Another musician offered a different version. She swung the bottle because she couldn't handle the chemistry. Every retelling made her look unhinged, emotional, or obsessed. Morrison didn't just distort the story, he hijacked the truth and turned it into a sideshow. And the worst twist hit later that year at the Scene nightclub in New York during her East Coast run. Janis walked in with a couple friends after a Fillmore East set, only to hear Morrison loudly reenacting the entire bottle incident to a circle of spectators who didn't know whether to laugh or stare. He flung his arms around, acting out her swing like it was slapstick comedy. Then he spotted her across the room, lifted his drink with a smug smile, and smirked like the whole thing was an inside joke. Janis froze, swallowed the fury burning in her chest, and walked out without saying a single word. That moment sealed everything for her. She realized Morrison wasn't dangerous because he lost his temper. He was dangerous because he truly believed his own stories, even when they erased someone else's reality. He was dangerous because he truly believed he had the right to rewrite any woman's truth, even if it cost her everything. From that moment on, Janis didn't just avoid him. She held a clean, sharp hatred that never faded. Not even months later, when they crossed paths backstage at a festival and she walked right past him without a single glance. After that night, nothing could ever be repaired. Once Morrison humiliated her at the Scene nightclub, Janis cut him out of her world with absolute precision. She refused to give him even one more chance to twist reality into something that served him. If she heard his name on a lineup, she changed her plans. If a journalist brought up the doors, she kept her answers short, polite, and empty. Most people didn't know this, but Janis wasn't someone who hated quick. She forgave small insults, brushed off people's mistakes, and laughed off drama that would have set others off. But Morrison crossed a line deeper than any temper outburst. He grabbed her fear, flipped it into desire, and turned it into a performance like it was material for a joke. That betrayal of truth was something she could never let slide. Ironically, both of them only grew more famous in the months after, brushing past each other like strangers at the Texas International Pop Festival in 1969. Morrison showed up backstage minutes before she did, and someone suggested they greet each other like old friends. Janis didn't even slow down. She walked straight past him, eyes forward, face unreadable, delivering a silent rejection that hit harder than any argument ever could. There was never a reunion, no apology, no private talk to clear the air. And when Janis passed in October 1970, Morrison was reportedly stunned into quiet disbelief. But even then, he never corrected the stories he'd spread, never admitted what really happened between them. 9 months later, he was gone too, leaving behind music, legends, and a feud locked forever in unfinished tension. Now that you know the real story, how do you see that infamous night? Do you think Janis reacted the way anyone in her spot would have, or was the industry too quick to shield Morrison? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, share it around, and subscribe for more untold stories the music world tried to bury.